Hi and welcome to our video preview for Ratchet & Clank for the PlayStation 2. Now this game is in development by Insomniac Games. Now this team actually created the Spyro franchise, but after they released, I believe it was Spyro 3 back in 2000, they decided that they had had enough with the franchise. They sold it off to Universal Interactive and decided to do their own game. Now the result is Ratchet & Clank, and 2 years of work have went into this game, and it definitely shows already in what we've been able to play. Now the premise behind the game is that Ratchet is an alien living on a planet. He's lived there his whole life, and all of a sudden this alien force called the Blarg comes in and starts mining his planet for resources. Now he doesn't want to just sit back and watch his planet get decimated by the aliens, so he decides to try to get off the planet. Unfortunately, he has a rocket, but he doesn't have an ignition wire. Well, luck would have it that a robot named Clank escapes from a robot factory and crash lands on Ratchet's planet. And the two get together and kind of have a symbiotic relationship, and then both of them want to get off the planet, and it just so happens that Clank has that ignition wire that Ratchet needs to start the rocket. Now Ratchet & Clank is a 3D platforming game, but there's a lot of things about the game that are different to kind of set it apart from other games in the genre. First of all, the first time you lay eyes on the game, you're going to swear it's a Banjo-Kazooie clone, because while Ratchet is primarily the controllable character, Clank sits on his back just like Kazooie does in Banjo-Kazooie, and in fact, it's very similar in some ways in that he'll actually pop out and he'll transform a little bit. For instance, the helicopter blades will pop out of his head to help them hover down to the ground. But the difference between this game and other games in the genre is that the focus is on the combat. And that's, to me, that's awesome, because I think everybody wants more action in this genre and less aimlessly wandering around, which is, something that happens in a lot of other games in the genre. The cool thing about the game is that it gives you many ways to defeat enemies. There's actually 35 different gadgets in the game. Gadgets is kind of a blanket term to describe weapons and other items that you can use to progress through the game. So far, the gadgets that we've seen include a flamethrower, a hoverboard, a blaster, but probably the primary combat weapon in the game is Ratchet's wrench. And basically, he can use the wrench to smash enemies when they're up close, like a melee weapon, or he can also throw the wrench to hit enemies from afar, or even to pick up what's dropped from enemies, which is bolts. And now bolts basically govern the entire game, and they're pretty much the only thing you have to collect in the game, which I think most people will be pretty happy about. And basically, when you defeat an enemy, a bunch of bolts will shoot out of them and they'll fall on the ground. And when you collect those bolts, you can then use them as currency in the game to buy new gadgets, new weapons or whatever, and you also have to use them to open up new levels. So basically, the whole game is governed by this bolt system. Now, the puzzles and level design in this game are all, once again, built around gadgets. You'll come into one particular section of the game, and maybe you'll see a ring hanging up there. You'll have to use one gadget to grapple onto the ring, and you'll land on a platform. Then on the next platform, you'll see another area where you have to use a different gadget. And the whole game is built around this. And the cool thing is that you don't have to necessarily buy the gadgets in a set order. You can basically purchase them in whatever order you want to, as long as they're available. So in this way, the game's actually kind of different for each person. Now, much like Kazooie and Banjo-Kazooie, Clank can actually be upgraded. And like I said before, he has abilities like being able to have the propeller pop out of his head so they can float down, but he also does a bunch of other things too. For instance, he can, if you upgrade him, he can help you jump higher, or he can help you jump farther. And it's kind of cool how not only are you upgrading with gadgets, you're also actually upgrading the characters that play through the game. And although Insomniac hasn't officially shown this yet, I can tell you, because I saw in the dev stations, that there are levels where you can play Clank by himself. Now, like most 3D platformers, Ratchet & Clank's graphics are colorful and they're bright, and maybe the character models will appeal to kids or whatever, but from a technical standpoint, this game kicks some serious ass. I mean, the graphics engine in this game, it can draw so many polygons at once. In fact, when I first laid eyes on the game, I had problems believing that it was a PlayStation 2 game. Not only does it draw a lot of polygons like Jak and Daxter, you can still see like a lot of detail from a distance, which is something you couldn't do in Jak and Daxter. It would actually haze out a lot of objects in the distance, and in this game that's not the case. You can see literally for miles. There's one section in one of the levels where you hop on a little hover train, and you can kind of just stand on the train and just go into a first-person viewing mode and just look around and see everything going on. I mean, the world's there. There's hovercraft flying from one end of the level to the other, and at the same time there's exhaust flying out of their tailpipes, and all this is pulled off with no hit in the frame rates. And to be honest with you, it's probably the most technically impressive PlayStation 2 game I've laid eyes on so far. The textures are probably the game's weak point so far. I mean, they're not bad, and there's definitely a nice variety, but they're kind of flatly shaded, and they could definitely maybe be a little higher resolution. But seriously, that's about the only complaint I have with the game's graphics. The animation is also top-notch, and the cool part about the animation is that you can actually combine moves together. Another thing I should mention about the graphics is the camera. The camera in this game is great, and the reason why the camera is so good in this game is because they worked on it for 9 months. Most development studios aren't going to give the camera the attention that Insomniac has given to Ratchet & Clank's camera. And again, it's just another one of those little things that separate the great games from the good games. And I can already see by spending some time in Insomniac that this team is dedicated to making sure that this game sets a new paradigm in the genre. Overall, I'd have to say that I'm very excited for Ratchet & Clank. I mean, granted, I'm a platforming junkie. If you've watched or read Gamespot for very long, you probably know that by now. And games like this definitely get my motor revving. But what really gets me excited about this game is that Insomniac has taken the time to remedy a lot of the problems that I've had with platforming games in the past. For instance, certain parts of the levels, after you get past them, the levels will mutate and it will create a shortcut, so you don't have to constantly backtrack through the same levels. And perhaps the biggest and most simple change, and something I've been asking for forever from this genre, is a map. This game has a map. It'll show you where objects are, where enemies are, which objectives you have or have not accomplished, so you're not just aimlessly wandering around trying to figure out where this one little piece of the puzzle fits in. So I definitely have to say I'm very excited about this game. I hope you are too, and we should be hearing more about Ratchet & Clank in the near future.